Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to the Bridgepaw Triangle subregion of Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, and we're looking at the Tamra Washington Wines 2018 Cabernet Franc. Tamra Washington Wines is a partnership between Tamra Washington and her husband Simon Kelly. Tamra grew up in Malborough and from a young age was working in vineyards and restaurants, and this is what sparked her fascination with the world of wine. After completing her viticulture and oenology studies in New Zealand, she then went on to spend some time working in New Zealand as well as California and Italy before eventually returning home. Tamra Washington Wines is a premium negociant project, and Tamra's working with key growers and select organically farmed vineyards across New Zealand. And Tamra told me that it was her mission from day one to make a Cabernet Franc as part of her wine range. Having spent time living and working in Europe for over 7 years, she fell in love with Loire Valley Cabernet Franc during this time, and she drank those wines as often as she could. Now, it did take her a while to find this special pocket of Cabernet Franc vines that are planted in the Howell Prospect Vineyard in the Bridgepaw Triangle subregion of Hawke's Bay. And this 2018 is her inaugural vintage of Cabernet Franc. Now, I'm sure there's a few of you out there that are curious as to what the Cabernet Franc picture looks like in New Zealand. I mean, we know that Sauvignon Blanc is king in terms of plantings, and Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc do grow side by side in a number of regions around the world, like the Loire and Bordeaux and elsewhere. So in theory, perhaps Cabernet Franc is maybe widely-ish planted in New Zealand? No, it's not. There's a measly 91 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines planted in New Zealand. And as a point of comparison, there's around 26,559 hectares of Sauvignon Blanc planted in the country. That's a whopping 64% of the area under vine in New Zealand. And the number one red grape variety is Pinot Noir, and there's about 5,807 hectares of Pinot Noir planted, and that's only about 14% of the area under vine in the country. Now, all of you Cabernet Franc lovers out there, do not despair. I'm told by some local folks that while the examples of 100% Cabernet Franc from New Zealand are few and far between, those that are working with the grape are making some pretty awesome expressions of Cabernet Franc. Now, these 91 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines are mostly planted in the Hawke's Bay region. That's about 60 hectares total that are planted there. And the Hawke's Bay region is the second largest growing region in the country, and it is the premier growing region for the red Bordeaux varieties as well as Syrah. So it's worth taking a second to take a quick look at some of the key elements that influence the viticultural environment here. So the Hawke's Bay region is located in New Zealand's North Island. And remember, when we're in the southern hemisphere, as we move north, we're getting closer to the equator. So we're getting, in theory, into warmer microclimates. And the Hawke's Bay region is on the east coast of the North Island, and we're bound by the Pacific Ocean and Hawke's Bay itself to the east. And then in the west, there's a couple mountains here. We have the Ruahine and the Hawke Mountains. And descending from these mountains are a series of ancient rivers that have carved out valleys and terraces and plains all across the Hawke's Bay region. And these help to define the many subregions that we find here. The microclimate of Hawke's Bay would be characterized as cool to moderate maritime, depending on where you are in the region. And the growing season temperatures are hovering just a little bit cooler than what we would typically see in Bordeaux. And the warmest temperatures are on the coast, and then things get progressively cooler as you move inland. The summertime temperatures do get a bit warm, but these temperatures are tempered and cooled by the cool Pacific Ocean. Now, the region also experiences a high number of sunshine hours during the year, about 2,200 in total, and that makes it one of the sunniest regions in New Zealand. And then the region also experiences low to moderate rainfall, on average about 800 millimeters of rainfall in the main growing regions around the cities of Napier and Hastings, and the rainfall or precipitation will increase as you move inland as well. So we have warmer temperatures, sunny conditions, lower rainfall, and then we have the maritime influence of the Pacific Ocean, which extends the growing season of the region. And all of these factors combine to create an environment with the ideal conditions for ripening longer season red varieties. The topography and these many rivers that flow through the Hawke's Bay region define the soils that we find here. And they've identified 25 different soil types or terroir units across the region. And these soils, coupled with the nuances of the microclimates across the region, have led to the creation of 9 distinct subregions in Hawke's Bay, and the most well-known of which is gimlet gravels, and the largest of these subregions is the Bridgepaw Triangle, which is where the fruit for today's wine is coming from. So the Bridgepaw Triangle covers an area of about 2,000 hectares, and there's about 1,250 hectares under vine. And this region is located about 17 kilometers inland from the coast, and we're on the southern bank of the Narrower River. And the region is on what is essentially several alluvial terraces that were carved out by the Narrower River over the course of tens of thousands of years. Another example of which is Gimlet Gravels, which is just east of where the Bridgepaw Triangle is located. And actually, it's interesting to note that those 60 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines that are planted in Hawke's Bay are pretty much evenly split between Gimlet Gravels and the Bridgepaw Triangle. They each have about 30 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines total. And from what I've read, the Bridgepaw Triangle is slightly cooler than Gimlet Gravels. In terms of soils in the Bridgepaw Triangle, the soils here are the oldest on the Haratunga Plain, which is this large swath of land that covers a good chunk of the Hawke's Bay region, where we find many of the grape growing areas. And there are 3 main soils. We have 2 kinds of a sandy loam. There's also a clay loam, and these are alluvial origin, and they're derived from loess as well as volcanic ash and greywacke, which is a type of sandstone. All 3 of these topsoils are relatively shallow, about 40 to 70 centimeters, and they overlay a very deep subsoil of red metals, and that's the local name for this subsoil, red metals. And these red metals are iron-rich alluvial gravels. And they actually have an interesting ability to retain moisture and actually do a really good job of retaining moisture, which limits the need for irrigation in the vineyards. Now, this is coming from a 0.2 hectare parcel of Cabernet Franc vines planted in the Howell Prospect Vineyard. And this vineyard is located in the southern part of the Bridgepaw Triangle. And the vineyard has a north-facing exposure, and there is a series of hills to the south, which actually help to protect the vineyard from excess rainfall. The vines were planted in 1997, and the vine row is planted north-south with the fruiting wire on the east side of the canopy, and that makes sure that the bunches receive the cooler morning sunshine. And then there's sufficient shading on the west side of the canopy, which helps to protect the bunches from the warmer afternoon sunshine. And in terms of soils, there's 2 soils actually. This block covers 2 soils from north to south. And we have the Naratawa sandy loam, which is in the upper portion. And then we have the Iron Gate sandy loam, which is in the lower portion. And these 2 top soils overlay those all-important red metal gravels. And Tamra told me that these red gravels are important and contribute to a greater depth of flavor in the finished wine, as well as greater concentration. And also what's important to note is about this site that Tamra explained to me is that this site actually allows her to pick a little bit earlier as well. So the grapes will achieve good phenolic ripeness, but maintaining lower alcohols. So from a winemaking perspective, Tamra's approach with this wine really is dictated by the fruit and the quality and the ripeness of the fruit, and it allows her to take a bit of a Loire approach, if you will, in terms of vinification. So the fruit is hand harvested and it is destemmed, and then the fermentation is with selected yeasts in open top, smaller stainless steel fermenters. She'll go in and do some pump overs twice daily during the fermentation. The total time on skins is about 24 days, and then aging takes place in French oak barrels, about 18% of which is new, and the wine will rest there for about 10 months before bottling. So let's get into this wine. So on the nose is actually, the wine is finally starting to open up a bit now with a bit of oxygen. And I'm getting a nice mix of fruits here, and the fruits do lean a little bit on the sweeter side. There is a certain luminosity to the fruits. but they are a bit more wild and savory, foresty, if you will, like wild strawberry, a bit of cherry. There's a bit of plum here. And they do have, like I said, this underlying kind of savory edge to them. And the pyrazines are nice. They're coming through in a very particular way. They're not as common as I noticed in particular Loire wines or some other places, but it's like nettle. There's a bit of marjoram here. There's like a tea leaf thing going on as well. And there's a little bit of spiciness on the nose, but overall, really clean, very pure, and that nice savory edge to the nose. On the palate, those same fruits come through really well, and I love that strawberry note is just gorgeous. And there is a little bit of a darker edge, a bit of brambly character as well in terms of the fruits. Pyrazines are bang on as they were on the nose. What's interesting about the palate is it's quite floral. The nose less so, but the palate is really quite floral. And it's an interesting mix of exotic flowers. There's like a dried rose petal thing. There's even like potpourri. There's a bit of jasmine here too, but very floral on the palate, which is kind of interesting. Unlike anything I've had before. And I'm not sure whether that's the clones or the site or a combination of things, but it's quite cool on the palate. The palate also has a nice spiciness, bit of allspice, some nutmeg, and then we're getting into some tertiary layers here. I get a little bit of licorice. There's a touch of like a milk chocolate thing going on as well. The acidity is bright, balancing. There's a juiciness. There's even a little bit of a crunchy edge to the acidity. The tannins are gorgeous. Tamra nailed these tannins, and that makes me really happy. There's a nice silkiness in the mouth. They're fine grain, and then they finish with a little bit of chalkiness, which is terrific. The overall profile of this wine is medium bodied. It does sit a little bit more broadly on the palate, and what's remarkable is there is good concentration here. There is a bit of power here in terms of the overall profile, good depth of flavor as well. And this clocks in at 12.5 alcohol, which is pretty impressive because it does pack a bit of a punch in terms of what you experience in the glass. Yeah, I'm really digging this wine. I think it's a fantastic first effort from Tamra in terms of her first vintage of Cabernet Franc from this particular site. And I haven't had much experience with Cabernet Franc from New Zealand, but gosh, I hope they start to make more of it because I think the conditions are great for Cabernet Franc. They're a little cooler, you get great acidities, great balance, and it's a region that I'm really excited about. And this is a great example of what I think New Zealand could do. Has a bit of a Loire energy to it, but it still has a bit of that New World kind of modern sensibility to it as well. And I just think it's delicious. It's got some power behind it, but there's elegance here. That floral element is really cool as well. And it's just a delicious example of Cabernet Franc. And hopefully I can track more of these wines down in the future. If you've had a New Zealand Cabernet Franc before, let me know who the producer is and what you thought of that wine in the comments below. And of course, as always, I'll be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.